Hello everyone, welcome to my new series, Can You Resist? This is the first of a three-part series where I show you how you can create fabulous resist techniques in your mixed medium paper craft products using common art supplies and found objects. So let's get busy trying out the first technique. Today we're just going to use some scrap paper, offcuts and papers where I've been messing around with watercolor paint. If you want to know how to create any of these sorts of papers, please do have a look at my 8 fun and easy ways to create watercolor backgrounds video. So for our first technique, we're going to be using wax. So I've used an old Christmas candle here and I've just shaved it off so we don't have that red coloring. If you don't have any white candles around at your house, you could use a white crayon. It would do the same thing. All right, so I think we will start with this little scrap here. Now, if you don't know how to create these backgrounds, it is just using the wet on wet technique. So I'm going to work on top of this. I'm going to use a stencil, and I'm sure many of you have stencils. And I'm going to use the wax crayon to just create circles. And of course what that will do, and I'm not worried about if the whole circle is covered. If we do cover all of the circle, that's great. If we don't, it doesn't matter. So we're just colouring in where we want our second watercolor paint that we're going to put over the top to resist. We'll end up with some lovely circular designs with this lovely green showing through. You can do this with a lot of your stencils that have perhaps larger shapes on them, and you can end up with some really lovely designs and patterns happening. And I'm just going to go over some of these white areas as well, just so you can see what sort of look you can get using that. Now this is probably one of your easiest and most common resist techniques, is using wax. Okay, so we lift off our stencil and you can probably see that we have got clear indication of wax on there. So what we want to do is lightly dust off the excess wax we have on there. And now we're going to put some watercolor paint over the top of this. Now you have a couple of options here, and what I'll do is I'll show you on one half one technique and on the other half. So when we're talking about watercolors, we know already that we can do there's two main techniques. The first one being wet on wet, where we wet the surface of the paper and then we apply our paint, and wet on dry, where we leave the paper dry and we put that wet paint onto the surface. Okay, of course when we're working with watercolor, we need to have clean water. Now I'm thinking I'll try it with 2 different colors so you can really get an idea of the different looks you can create. So on this half, I'm going to do the wet on wet. I'm wetting the surface of the paper first. Now I may get some movement of the watercolor paint underneath. It reacts to water, of course. So we have got some little bit area here where the paint is starting to run. And then I have to pick out a colour that we're going to put over the top. So I think I'm going to go with this blue, which is quite a dark sort of navy type of blue. And if I paint over the top, you can see if I'm dropping that blue in that we've got this great effect. We can see the circles coming through. Look at that, so pretty already. So this is probably one of your easiest mixed media techniques for resist, is using a wax crayon or a wax candle and a stencil, and you can create a bit of pattern. I'm going to leave this area a bit white here and over here because I think it makes it look more interesting. All right, so that's our wet on wet happening there. what I'm thinking is I might go with this pastel sky blue here. Now this is a more opaque because clearly it has white mixed into the blue pigment. So remember this half of our paper is dry, so you're not going to get the same effect. The paint is not going to run as much. But you can see how it does resist the candle. But using a more opaque paint, we can cover most of that background colour. Now I'm just going to pick up some water and add a bit of water to it and see if we can dilute it a bit so it's a little bit more transparent. Okay, so it's that easy. Look how great that is. I'm just going to pick it up and show you up close in camera. So I've got this really lovely texture. The green looks great with that dark blue. This blue, of course, is more translucent because we had wet water, so the paint travels easier through it and dilutes. And also with the wet on dry, the paint I chose was more opaque. So I've gone for that sky blue. So it is covering more of the background, but it's still an interesting look. Okay, of course, what you want to do is dry that off. If you've got a heat gun, definitely give that a go before you work any media on top of this. Technique number 2. So technique number 2, we are using some impasto gel medium. So if you're not sure what that means, gel medium just means it's translucent rather than some impasto mediums which are opaque. So it will dry clear, which is what we want it to do. Right, so what we're going to do is use our gel medium and 2 different stencils this time. So we'll go one side and the other side. Okay, so you need a brush, and the gel medium is sort of like runny cream in thickness. So when we're using it, we want to make sure that we're being really careful with our coverage. Now, because this is a little bit shorter than my 6x6, I actually go on an angle with it. And holding the stencil in place, I'm going to paint over the top with our gel medium. And I'm not aiming to cover the whole thing. I just want to have a section coming through here. So these little sample pieces I will probably turn into tags or use as mats for scrapbook layouts. However, you can of course do any of these techniques on your big 12x12, or if you're creating artworks on your A3. Now I'm going to let that just sit one moment, and then I'm going to hit it with the heat gun before I lift the stencil away. With your brush, just so you can keep using it, just pop it into some water. So when I'm using the heat gun, I'm holding it up here, so I'm not getting too close. We don't want our stencil to melt. Okay, so you can see that the gel medium, can you see that in the light? You should be able to see that, is starting to dry and becoming translucent. Some areas that are still white, so we can't paint over it yet. While that's drying, I'm going to move on with our second stencil. Now with your brush, using the gel medium, it's very much like a glue, so what you want to do is make sure you give it a rinse out and wipe it. We don't want to add moisture to our gel medium. We want it to sit in the stencil with some thickness and body to it. So just dry your brush off a little bit before you use it. Okay, so I'm popping this one on this side. So we're getting some more of our gel medium. And with this one, I'm going to purposely pull down here. The reason I'm doing that is because it's a bit more delicate than the other design, and we've got more chance of gel seeping where we don't want it to go if we pull across with a brush. So I'm going to hold it as I go and work down the page. Getting sticky fingers. And once again, I'm going to hit the stencil and the gel with the heat gun just for a little bit, just to dry it off a bit before I remove the stencil. Okay, I'm going to lift it from the bottom up. And then straight away I will go and clean off the stencil while that sits there and dries a bit. Right, last time we used some watercolor paint over our resist technique, and this time we're going to have a go using some sprays. So I have Kaiser Miss Candy Iridescent Spray, which is quite opaque, and then another Candied one. We have Distress Spray Stain in Candied Apple. So just a reminder for those of you that haven't watched any of my videos before, I work on a drafting table, so I have a sloped desk. So you will see running happening most likely. If you work on a flat surface, you can just move your card around to get the effect that you want. So I think what we'll do is we'll try some Candied Apple, Tim Holtz product. One of his old products, Distress Spray Stain. Okay, so if you look carefully, you can see that it is subtly resisting the stenciling that we did. Now, it's not running that well. I'm going to drop a bit of water in there to get it moving a bit more. What we're going to do now is we are going to actually lift some of this off as well. So using a piece of paper towel, you can use a tissue, you can use a baby wipe. It's going to lightly press over a bit so it pulls up some of the colour there. Okay, so can you see that? So the gel clearly has created a resist, and our lovely stencil pattern is on the card. Now, on top of that, of course, you can add other stains and colour. I think I'm going to drop in some darker red as well. So this is a Dylusions ink spray. And I'm just trying to read what it's called here. Pomegranate seed. So it's a much darker red than our Candied Apple. Alright, so for some reason it does not want to pump out. So we're going to suck it up instead using the pump mechanism and drop some on top here. Ooh, now it's very dark. It's reacting with the Candied Apple and looks quite, it has, because it's such a dark red, it's reacting with the Candied Apple and becoming quite chocolatey. I'll put the lid on that before I knock it over. Alright, and so once again you can move it around a bit. Highlight areas where you want it to be. I think I'm going to put a bit more through here. stand out more than others. Okay, so that's a good start as a base for something. All right, let's use our Kaiser Craft Miss Candy Iridescent Spray on the other side. Now this is pretty opaque. It's different to our Distress Stain and our ink spray. Okay, so you can see the pattern is starting to show. Because it's so opaque, it's covering a lot of our gel medium areas. So I'm just going to move it with, that's better. Look, if we just tap it lightly, then, and remove some of the mist, we can see our resist happening there. All right, it's quite pretty. It's quite a rose sort of pink. I'm just going to put a wee bit more on there. I want some colour down here. Okay, and on top of that, we're going to put some more of the red here. So we've got our candied apple again. So we get a bit of depth of colour happening. You don't want everything to look exactly the same. Want some things to be darker and some areas to be lighter. Okay, so there we go. Technique number 2, using gel medium. Okay, so this time I'm going to show you a different method of using the gel medium. Right, so I'm going to use this Kaiser Craft Stencil, which might be nice. Okay, so we're just going to apply our gel medium over the top. Try and keep your stencil flat. You can speed up the drying process with your heat gun. Okay, so I'm going to go with some Sonja's Cobalt Blue Hue. It is just acrylic paint. You could use any brand of acrylic paint you like, and I'm actually just going to stick it straight on to our cardstock here. So I'm feeling lazy. Alright, we need a brush. We're putting our acrylic over the top. So, as you can see, with acrylic paint, the resist doesn't always show up straight away. Got little hints there where the paint's thinner. And what we're actually going to do is we're going to wipe a lot of this paint off so we can really see our resist. I'm going to come in with a baby wipe. I'm going to wipe the paint away. Look at that. Looky, looky. So giving it, we're getting sort of more of an antique sort of look. Pulling that paint off. So it's almost got a chalky look to it now. And you can clean it as much as you like. So if you really want your stars to shine bright, you're going to work on taking more paint off those areas where they are. If you have a close look at it, you can see how the gel medium has created the resist, and we can see the colours that we had that were watercolour shining through. Okay, I'm just going to come in and we're going to add a bit more colour to it. So I'm using Distress ink pad here, which is Faded Jeans. And I just want to get a darker edge happening. And then I want to give it quite a solid border that's dark. So I'm going with some brushed corduroy right along the edge. Okay, and then the other thing you can do, of course, is you can stamp on top of this, which we can do as well. So let me just find a stamp.